Okay, I went through and I read all of the CEITX report on their review of the 2020 Republican primary ballots. Now, though there were some really damning things observed, they were not properly documented. I'm going to go over my issues with the report here. I mean, I'm sorry, but like, if I think something's being misrepresented, I'm going to say it. Okay, and first I will have tried to say it to the source, and I tried for a long time to get them to get this stuff right. Okay, so anywho, this is my report on the CEITX report. This is the negatives. The positives will come here in a minute. This report ends up endorsing RLAs. It flat out does. It glazes over obvious issues with Secretary of State advisory codes and misinterpretations of the preservation of election record laws. The ballot preparation is totally unlawful, and most of the violated codes were not listed. They mentioned a lot of issues, but they didn't cite the codes along with it, which is sort of what is needed to drive home that the issue that they recorded is against the law. So that's a little bit disappointing. All right. This report ends up disclosing the names of all volunteers after having them sign an NDA. The author glazes over obvious violations of state election codes and over issues with the SOS advisory authorizing those violations of state election codes. Misinterpretation of clear election laws related to the preservation of election records has cost significant time. That misinterpretation of the preservation of election records has cost every election integrity group a significant amount of time. Because I read the law, and it didn't say anything about waiting 22 months. Early voting procedures are often needlessly unlawful and operating outside of Election Day practices as required in Texas Election Code 81.002, which says that all Election Day laws also apply to early voting where feasible. Unless there's a reason you can't do it, you need to be following the Election Day laws throughout early voting too. They documented evidence of that, but they didn't cover this at all, which is a big deal. Though I understand the time constraints, this recount was too much of an RLA, a risk-limiting audit, to be considered substantial. At the end of this report, it ends up endorsing risk-limiting audits, which are fake audits, and this report itself is like a risk-limiting audit. In my opinion, that's how irrelevant this report is and how inconclusive this report is. Every issue found was either answered by Hyder or glazed over by the author, who failed to depict the enormity of the situation they participated in. Though this report had the opportunity to outline the abuses of the Texas Secretary of State, issuing advisories in violation of the election code, it not only failed to do that, but also failed to identify a culprit or even a crime at their micro-level effort. They have not even identified a crime. Despite having documented evidence of election law violations, they didn't name a crime or a culprit. So, none of this is a reflection on the volunteers. They're really great people. CEITX is not their volunteers, though they will try to take credit for everything independent researchers do. The author uses terminology showing that this is secondhand information to him and that he has not spoken to anyone in Tarrant County elections about these issues. Segregated primaries, that's not a thing. The term is split primary, and the early voting period does not keep the parties split. If the chairs vote for a split primary, that only gets put into effect on Election Day. All throughout early voting, Hyder does whatever he wants, regardless of what the party chairs want, and they're letting all of the ballots for both parties go into the same scanner tabulator. All ballots are cast in the same scanner during early voting, as early voting is run by a different entity under different laws than on Election Day. This should have been thoroughly examined. The finding that any Election Day and absentee votes were split by party is really easily explained. Only absentee and Election Day votes were split by party. They were like, oh, we make a note of that. It's like, yeah, because if you're a poll watching, you would know why that is. If you talked to Hyder, he would tell you, yeah, we don't do the split primary throughout early voting. Knowledge of the Texas Election Code for storage of election records by this team would have explained why the boxes weren't grouped by polling locations as well. So they're saying that they didn't have one box of ballots match the files that were sent to them, like in the groups, because they scanned them into the computer by box, and then the boxes they pulled out didn't match any of those files. Well, yeah. So after 60 days after the election, 60 days after the election, all of the ballot transfer bags by polling location are stored. They're moved into other boxes and stored kind of like randomly for the remainder of the preservation period. So what probably happened was they scanned boxes of ballots and then they kind of just put them erroneously back into other boxes. I'm just saying that's likely, and because they weren't offered a chain of custody, they said that they asked, they said they were denied, and they said they were denied the right to go and observe the scanning of the ballots. I mean, he should have really driven that home. Like, it looks like they totally mishandled those election records, but the author glazed over that really bad, in my opinion. Regardless of whether the ballot was missing a number, all of the ballots are unlawfully prepared. None are lawfully numbered, and this report failed to thoroughly explore this, despite this particular group being constantly given this information by other researchers. Misrepresentation and misunderstandings of the law could be the death of Texas election integrity. Hyder explained the discrepancies of totals with the idea that the machines had been loaded with one wrong ballot style and had to be reprogrammed 3 days into the election. He said that later, combining voted files from the two versions of the election program, two staffers entered the same data into the accumulator, and it was for that Senate race that they're saying had like double the votes. Hyder also says the election code allows for him to change election programming after the public testing, and they just kind of said that and then glazed over that. They didn't focus on that. This report did not take full advantage of the data retained by CEITX volunteers who did excellent work and displayed excellent self-governing skills on the spot when CEITX left them to conduct this mini audit on their own. The authors should have disclosed themselves instead of the names of the citizen volunteers, should have named every violation of state law and eligible election advisory instead of focusing on items which were feasibly explained and which proved nothing of substance. There is substance here, and good people trying to grasp it. They deserve better. I'll tell you what I like later about the report. But that's what I don't like about the report, and it's a lot. Okay, have a good day. Love you, bye.